Well, with all due respect, Mr. Prime Minister, your record on climate is a litany of broken promises, including one that's directly relevant to the questions that Paul Wells was asking you about exports. You committed in 2008 not to export unprocessed oil, bitumen, to countries that had weaker emission standards than Canada. That would obviously include China, the destination point for Enbridge and Kinder Morgan, which only the Green Party on this stage opposes. It makes no sense to export unprocessed oil to countries with poor environmental records. You also committed to bring in a North America-wide cap-and-trade program, working with partners. That was way back in another speech from the throne in 2008. Under John Baird as Environment Minister, you committed to oil and gas regs, which we would see by 2010. And you also personally went to Copenhagen. It wasn't a previous promise from Jean Chrétien. You were in Copenhagen and committed to what was, I hate to say, a very weak target, but we are not going to come anywhere near it by 2020. And there's just no credibility at this point. Canada needs to take action. We're having a summer of extreme drought, raging wildfires, and really severe weather through all of our seasons. Canadians want action. Canada needs to take action so that we can defend ourselves from the changing global climate and from the impacts economically here at home. With all due respect, Mr. Prime Minister, the only way you can take credit for the emissions drop, which only occurred in 2008 and 9, is the global financial crisis. That's the only thing that brought down our emissions. They would have gone up much more than they have now, if not for the action of Ontario in shutting down coal-fired power plants in British Columbia and bringing in a carbon tax. The cold, cruel reality is that under your watch, greenhouse gases have been rising, carbon pollution has been rising as soon as our economy began to recover in 2009. Straight up line.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that is about lowering emissions,
I have to try to explain that the reason the Green Party opposes every single one of the pipelines that are proposed, risky pipeline schemes to get unprocessed oil out of this country. Mr. Mulcair's right. Every single one of these raw bitumen, unprocessed oil pipeline schemes is about exporting Canadian jobs. That's why the Green Party knows we can oppose every single one of them. And I would like to have Mr. Mulcair's answer clearly. Will you join us and fight against the risky pipeline and tanker expansion, tripling the transport of unprocessed oil from Vancouver? Will you help us defend our coastlines?
I share the same concerns as Ms. May with regard to the Kinder Morgan pipeline that she just talked about. And in fact, that's another example of what Mr. Harper's done to our rules. Did you know that the groups that are involved in those processes, in those hearings for Kinder Morgan, are not even allowed to cross-examine the company's witnesses? That's a fundamental breach of the rules of natural justice, and that's why the public doesn't trust them anymore.
Do you oppose the pipeline and the tankers?
Opposing these pipelines systematically in advance is just as wrong as supporting them in advance, because in both cases what you need is an objective study.
So you just said that the process is flawed, but we should wait for it yourself? I'm still not sure where you stand on Kinder Morgan, because it's pretty straightforward. They plan to put 3 times as many tankers moving out Vancouver, loaded with diluted bitumen. It's very hazardous, risky material. And we know, regardless of what kind of process it goes through, it should not go ahead. It must be stopped. Mr. Prime Minister, where was your commitment you made at the G20 in Pittsburgh that you would end fossil fuel subsidies? You've just criticized the other opposition parties here over new subsidies to fossil fuels. That's what LNG is. It's fossil fuels. So you made a commitment globally. You've not eliminated the subsidies that go to the oil sands, but now you've added new subsidies that go to liquefied natural gas, which is fracked gas, which over its lifetime has the same carbon pollution footprint as coal.
We've been talking about some of the polls we have. The latest one is about a carbon tax, what they were discussing just now, the leaders, and surprising numbers, resounding numbers with it.
Sure, we have an overwhelming majority of Canadians who took the poll on Facebook that said that they believe that there should be a price put on carbon.